The hiss did not stop. It lingered, thin and steady, threading through the silence like something alive but patient. Daniel lifted his head slowly, eyes shifting from the photograph to the hallway beyond the open locker. "Do you hear that?" he asked, quieter this time, like raising his voice might make it disappear. Olivia frowned, arms still crossed, posture unchanged. "Hear what?" He did not answer right away. The sound was faint, but now that he had noticed it, it was impossible to ignore. It came in soft pulses, like air escaping from somewhere it should not. Daniel stepped away from the locker, the photograph still in his hand, and tilted his head slightly, trying to trace it. The corridor stretched long and empty under the cold fluorescent lights, every door closed, every shadow still. Then he remembered the clipboard. His gaze snapped back to the open locker, to the neat rows of handwritten notes. He moved quickly now, flipping through the pages until he found the line again. Third floor. Pressure irregular at 1:40 a.m. Monitor. His thumb pressed into the paper as if it might give him more than ink. Olivia took a step closer, her heels softer now, less certain. "That could mean anything," she said. But there was a small crack in her tone, something that had not been there before. Daniel shook his head slightly. "No, not anything." He glanced down at the timestamp on his watch. 2:17 a.m. Less than 40 minutes later. The hiss continued, almost too quiet to be real, but steady, too steady. He looked back at the photograph in his hand, at the man moving through smoke without hesitation, holding something fragile like it mattered more than anything else. Then he looked at the hallway again. "Where is Marcus now?" Olivia hesitated. "Just for a second. Break room. Where you found him." Daniel nodded once, already moving. His boots echoed against the tile as he headed down the corridor, the sound sharper now, cutting through the stillness. The smell changed as he walked. The bleach faded, replaced by something faintly metallic, something dry. He passed the maintenance closet, the utility sink, the silent vending machines that glowed dimly in the corner like they were watching. The hiss grew slightly louder with each step, not enough for panic, but enough to press against his thoughts. He reached the break room door and pushed it open without slowing. The light inside was softer, warmer, but it did not make the scene any easier to read. Marcus Reed sat exactly where he had been before, slouched back in the chair, head tilted, eyes closed. Still, too still. For a moment, Daniel just stood there, the photograph loose in his hand, his breath shallow without him noticing. Olivia caught up behind him, stopping just short of the doorway. "See," she said quietly. "Sleeping." But the word did not land the way it had earlier. Daniel stepped closer, slower this time, like approaching something that might break if he moved too fast. "Marcus," he said, not loud, but firm. No response. He took another step. The hiss was louder here. Not from the hallway now. From somewhere above. Or below. Or both. He could not tell. He reached out, hesitated for half a second, then gently touched Marcus's shoulder. The fabric of the uniform was damp. Not soaked. Just enough to feel wrong. "Marcus," he said again. This time, there was a response. Not a movement. Not a word. Just a breath. Shallow. Uneven. Daniel's eyes narrowed. This was not sleep. He turned his head slightly, scanning the room, and that was when he saw it. On the far wall, near the floor, a thin line ran along the baseboard. A pipe. Old. Faded paint. And right where it curved into the corner, something shimmered in the light. Not water. Not quite. The hiss pulsed again, just a little stronger. Daniel straightened slowly, the pieces falling into place in a way that made his chest tighten. He looked back at the clipboard in his mind, at the note written in steady, careful lines, at the time stamped beside it. "Monitor." He swallowed once, then spoke, his voice lower now, stripped of assumption. He was not sleeping. Olivia did not answer. For the first time since they had walked down that hallway, she said nothing at all. Daniel moved first. Not fast, not rushed, but with a clarity that had not been there before, like something inside him had shifted into place. "Stay here," he said quietly, though he did not wait for Olivia to respond. His eyes were already scanning the walls, the ceiling, the corners of the room where pipes ran like veins through the building. The hiss pulsed again, slightly louder now, no longer easy to ignore. It slipped under the door, curled along the floor, thin as a whisper but constant. Daniel stepped toward the baseboard, crouching near the pipe Marcus had been facing without anyone noticing. The paint along the metal had bubbled slightly, a faint distortion that caught the light at just the right angle. He leaned closer, careful, his breath held without thinking. The air smelled different here. Not sharp like cleaning chemicals. Not stale like the break room. Something else. Dry. Invisible. Wrong. He stood up slowly, his jaw tightening. "We need to shut this down," he said, more to himself than to Olivia. Behind him, she finally stepped into the room, her heels quieter now, her posture less certain than before. "Shut what down?" she asked, but the question lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. Daniel turned, holding her gaze for a moment. "The gas line," he said. The words hung there, heavier than anything else that had been said tonight. Olivia blinked, once, twice, processing. "You are guessing," she replied, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Daniel shook his head. "I am not." He gestured toward Marcus, still slumped in the chair, his breathing shallow but steady. He already knew. The room fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not empty, not indifferent. Tense. Waiting. Daniel moved to the wall phone, his hand hovering over it for a fraction of a second before he picked it up and dialed maintenance. No answer. He hung up, jaw tightening further, then turned toward the door. "Main shutoff valve is on the 3rd floor," he said, recalling the building layout from memory, but also from the notes he had just seen. Floor by floor, line by line. Marcus had mapped it all. Olivia hesitated near the doorway, her eyes flicking once more toward Marcus. "We cannot just leave him here," she said, quieter now. Daniel paused. For a second, the old instinct flickered across his face. Procedure. Report. Wait. But it faded just as quickly. He stepped back to Marcus, crouching slightly, his voice low but firm. "Marcus, can you hear me?" A faint shift this time. Not much. Just enough to know he was not alone inside himself. Daniel nodded once, like that was enough. "I am going to fix this," he said, not expecting an answer. Then he stood and turned, already moving toward the hallway. Olivia followed, her steps faster now, trying to keep up. The corridor felt different on the way back. Narrower. The lights harsher. The hiss louder. It echoed faintly now, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it feel like it was everywhere at once. Daniel took the stairs instead of the elevator, pushing through the heavy door and climbing 2 steps at a time. The metal railing was cold under his hand, grounding him. 2nd floor. Then 3rd. He pushed the door open and stepped into the dimly lit mechanical hallway, where the pipes were exposed and the air felt heavier, thicker. The hiss was no longer subtle. It was clear now. Present. Real. Daniel followed the sound, moving past valves and gauges until he found the line that matched the note. Pressure irregular. Monitor. The gauge needle trembled just above where it should have been. Not enough to trigger an alarm. Enough to matter. He reached for the shutoff valve, his hand pausing for just a fraction of a second as something crossed his mind. If he was wrong, this would cause a shutdown. Reports. Consequences. Questions. If he was right, it would stop something no one else had even noticed. He tightened his grip. Then he turned the valve. Slowly. Firmly. The hiss did not stop immediately. It faded. Gradually. Like something releasing its hold on the air. Daniel stood there, hands still on the metal, listening as the sound thinned, softened, and finally disappeared into silence. Real silence this time. Not empty. Not tense. Just still. He exhaled, a breath he did not realize he had been holding, and looked down at the valve beneath his hand. Then back toward the stairwell. Somewhere 2 floors below, a man had seen this coming long before anyone else had even looked. And Daniel knew, with a clarity that settled deep in his chest, that everything they thought they knew about Marcus Reed had just been proven wrong. The silence after the hiss faded felt heavier than the sound itself, like the building was recalibrating around what had almost happened without anyone noticing. Daniel kept his hand on the valve for a moment longer, fingers still wrapped around the cold metal, as if letting go too soon might bring the sound back. The gauge needle settled slowly, inch by inch, until it rested where it should have been all along. Normal. Safe. He stared at it, then exhaled quietly and stepped back. The air already felt different up here, lighter, easier to breathe, though nothing visible had changed. Behind him, Olivia stood near the doorway, her arms no longer crossed, her posture shifted in a way that made her look smaller than before. "Is it done?" she asked, her voice lower now, careful. Daniel nodded once. For now. He glanced around the mechanical corridor, at the lines and joints and valves that had been quietly holding pressure all night, unnoticed. But this did not start just now. Olivia did not respond immediately. Her eyes moved across the pipes, then back to him. You think he caught it earlier? It was not really a question. Daniel looked at her, then back toward the stairwell. He did more than catch it. His voice carried something new now. Not doubt. Not irritation. Something closer to respect, though he did not say it out loud. He turned and started back toward the stairs, his pace steady but quicker than before. Olivia followed without hesitation this time. The descent felt longer, each step echoing in the metal stairwell, each second stretching with the awareness of what had just been avoided. When they pushed back into the second-floor hallway, the difference was immediate. The air no longer carried that faint, wrong edge. The silence had settled into something calmer, something that did not press against the skin. Daniel moved straight for the break room, pushing the door open with a firm hand. Marcus was still there. Same chair, same position, but something had changed. His breathing was a little deeper now, a little more even, like his body was slowly finding its way back from wherever it had been holding on. Daniel stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. For a moment, he did not speak. He just looked, really looked, at the worn uniform. The faint lines of exhaustion etched into Marcus's face. The way his hands rested loosely at his sides, not careless, but spent. Olivia lingered near the door, her eyes moving between them, uncertain what to say, or if she should say anything at all. Daniel finally reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph he had taken from the locker. He looked at it again, the image clearer. Now under the steady light. The man in the smoke. The child held close. The determination in the set of his shoulders. Then he looked back at Marcus. The connection was no longer a question. It was fact. You wrote it all down, Daniel said quietly, almost to himself. Every line. Every check. His gaze drifted briefly toward the hallway, toward the pipes hidden behind walls and ceilings. You were tracking it before anyone else even knew to look. Marcus shifted slightly, a faint movement in his shoulder, like the words had reached him somewhere beneath the surface. His eyes did not open, but his breathing changed, just enough to notice. Daniel lowered the photograph slowly, his grip tightening just a little. The weight of the moment settled in, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. All the assumptions, all the quick judgments. They felt thin now, incomplete. He glanced back at Olivia, meeting her eyes for a brief second. There was no argument there anymore. No dismissal. Just a quiet understanding that something had been misread from the very beginning. Daniel turned back to Marcus, his voice steady, stripped of everything it had carried earlier in the night. You kept everyone safe, he said, not expecting acknowledgement, not needing it. The room stayed quiet. The fluorescent light hummed softly overhead. And for the first time since the night began, the silence did not feel like something waiting to break. It felt like something earned. Marcus's fingers twitched first. It was subtle, almost easy to miss, just a slight curl against the fabric of his pants, like his body was remembering how to move before his mind caught up. Daniel noticed immediately. He stepped closer without thinking, his voice low but steady. Marcus. This time, there was a response that could not be mistaken. A slow inhale, deeper than before. Then another. Marcus's head shifted a fraction to the side, his brow tightening as if the light above him had suddenly grown too bright. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs filled the space between breaths. Olivia moved a step closer to the doorway, her arms now resting at her sides, no longer guarded. Marcus's eyes opened halfway, unfocused at first, then narrowing slightly as the room came into view. He did not sit up right away. He just looked, his gaze moving from the ceiling to the wall, then finally landing on Daniel. There was no panic in his expression, no confusion, just a quiet awareness, like he had expected this moment, just not the timing. You shut it off, Marcus said, his voice rough but controlled, each word measured. Daniel nodded once. Third floor valve. Marcus's eyes held his for a second longer. Then he gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, like confirmation more than approval. He shifted in the chair, pushing himself upright slowly, one hand gripping the edge of the table for balance. The movement revealed the strain in his body, the weight he had been carrying through the night finally catching up to him. Olivia stepped forward now, hesitation written clearly in the way she paused before speaking. "You knew," she said, her voice softer than it had ever been. Marcus glanced at her briefly, then back at Daniel. "I heard it during the first round," he replied. Pressure was off. Not enough to trip the system, but enough to build. His gaze drifted toward the wall where the pipe ran behind the surface, as if he could still see through it. "I wrote it down. Came back twice to check." Daniel tightened his grip on the photograph still in his hand, the edges pressing lightly into his palm. "Why did you not call it in?" he asked. Marcus's expression did not change much, but something in his eyes shifted, something quieter, heavier. "I tried," he said simply. "No one picked up." The words landed without accusation. Just fact. Olivia looked down for a second, then back up, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Marcus stood fully now, steadying himself before letting go of the table. He adjusted his uniform slightly, smoothing out a crease that did not really matter. "It is handled now," he added, his tone calm, almost dismissive of his own role in it. Daniel shook his head slightly, the movement slow but firm. "It was handled because of you." Marcus did not respond to that. He simply looked at Daniel for a moment, then glanced past him toward the hallway, toward the work that still waited. "There are still 2 floors left," he said, as if the night had not shifted at all, as if nothing had nearly gone wrong. He stepped forward, reaching for the cleaning cart parked just outside the door. The wheels squeaked softly as he pulled it into the room, the familiar sound cutting through the quiet like a return to routine. Daniel watched him, something unsettled but steady forming in his chest. "Marcus," he said again. Marcus paused, one hand resting on the handle of the cart. He did not turn immediately. When he did, his expression was the same as it had always been. Calm, reserved, unmoved by recognition. Daniel held up the photograph slightly, not fully offering it, just enough to acknowledge what he had seen. "That building," he said quietly. "You were there." Marcus's eyes flicked to the image for a brief second, then back to Daniel. A pause. Not long, but enough to say more than words would have. "A long time ago," he replied. "Nothing more." He turned back to the cart, pushing it forward into the hallway, the sound of the wheels steady, grounded, unchanged. Olivia stepped aside to let him pass, her posture shifting just enough to make space, to acknowledge something she had not seen before. Daniel remained where he was for a moment longer, the photograph still in his hand, the silence around him no longer empty, but filled with something he could not ignore. Respect, quiet and unspoken, settling into place where judgment had been just hours before. The wheels of the cleaning cart rolled steadily across the tile, a soft rhythm that seemed to reset the night back into something ordinary, even though nothing about it felt the same anymore. Marcus moved with quiet efficiency, one hand guiding the cart, the other adjusting the handle of the mop as he passed under the dim overhead lights. The smell of bleach returned, familiar and sharp, cutting through the air that had only minutes ago carried something far more dangerous. Daniel stepped out into the hallway behind him, slower now, his eyes following every small movement Marcus made. There was no rush in him, no need to prove anything, just a steady continuation, like the night had always belonged to him. Olivia lingered near the break room door for a moment longer before stepping out as well, her heels softer against the tile, her posture no longer commanding but careful, almost reflective. "Marcus," she called, not loudly, but enough to stop him. He paused, turning slightly, one hand still resting on the cart handle. "Yes." She hesitated, searching for something that sounded right, something that matched what had just happened, but the words did not come easily. "About earlier," she began, then stopped. The sentence did not finish. Marcus waited, his expression calm, giving her the space to continue or not. The silence stretched just long enough to matter. Finally, she exhaled quietly. "We misread the situation." It was not an apology. Not fully, but it was the closest she had come. Marcus nodded once, a small, almost weightless acknowledgement. "It happens," he said. No edge, no bitterness, just a simple truth, spoken like something he had accepted a long time ago. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, the photograph still in his hand, though he had lowered it to his side. "Not like this," he said quietly. Marcus glanced at him, then at the floor for a brief second, as if considering whether to respond. "People see what fits," he said after a moment. "It is easier that way." The words settled into the space between them, not heavy, but undeniable. Olivia looked down again, her fingers tightening slightly at her sides, the weight of that sentence landing deeper than she expected. Marcus turned back to his cart, dipping the mop into the bucket, the water rippling under the fluorescent light. He wrung it out slowly, methodically, then pressed it to the floor, beginning a smooth, practiced motion across the tile. The sound of the mop sliding over the surface filled the hallway, steady and controlled, grounding everything back into routine. Daniel watched for a moment, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That line on the third floor," he said. "How long would it have taken before someone noticed?" Marcus did not stop moving. "Depends," he replied. "Could have been hours. Could have been less." He shifted the mop, covering another section of the floor, leaving a faint trail of clean behind him. Pressure builds quiet. Until it does not. Daniel nodded slowly, the implications settling in fully now. He glanced down the hallway, imagining it filled with people, with movement, with noise, none of them aware of what had been building beneath the surface. "You stayed," he said. Marcus gave a small shrug, almost imperceptible. "It is my shift." The simplicity of the answer landed harder than anything else. No mention of risk. No mention of what could have happened. Just responsibility. Olivia took a small step forward, her voice quieter. "Now that it had been all night, you should have reported it again. Escalated." Marcus paused, leaning slightly on the mop handle, his gaze steady but not confrontational. "I did what I could with what I had," he said. There was no defense in his tone, just a boundary. Olivia did not respond this time. She simply nodded, once, slowly. The hallway fell back into a quiet rhythm, the hum of the lights, the soft movement of the mop, the faint echo of distant ventilation now steady and controlled. Daniel looked down at the photograph one more time, then carefully slid it back into his pocket, as if it belonged there until it could be returned properly. He lifted his gaze again, watching Marcus continue down the corridor, cleaning a path that most people would walk over without ever noticing. And for the first time, Daniel understood that what had been invisible before had never been absent. It had just been overlooked. The hallway stretched longer the further Marcus moved down it, each section of clean floor reflecting the overhead lights in quiet, steady lines. The rhythm of his work did not change, but something in the air around him had. Not visible, not spoken, just noticed. Daniel walked a few steps behind now, not out of duty, not out of suspicion, but because something in him was not ready to step away yet. The building felt different when you knew where to look. Every vent, every pipe behind the walls, every quiet system doing its job without asking for attention. Marcus reached the end of the corridor and paused near a small utility panel set low into the wall. He set the mop aside carefully, kneeling down without a word, his fingers brushing lightly across the metal surface before opening it. Inside, a narrow set of gauges and lines sat in ordered rows, each one marked with small labels that most people would never read. Daniel leaned slightly to the side, watching. "You check all of them?" he asked. Marcus nodded once, already scanning the dials. "Every night," he said. His voice was even, like it did not need emphasis. "Things change when no one is looking." The statement settled into the quiet space, simple but heavy with meaning. Daniel glanced back down the hallway, then back at Marcus. "And if something is off?" Marcus adjusted one of the smaller valves, just a fraction, the movement precise, practiced. "Then I watch it longer," he replied. "Make sure it is not something worse." Olivia stood a few steps behind them now, her arms loosely folded again, but not in the same guarded way as before. This time it looked more like she was holding on to something she was still trying to understand. "You keep records of all this?" she asked. Marcus reached into the side of the panel and pulled out a thin notepad, flipping it open to reveal lines of handwriting similar to what Daniel had seen in the locker. "Dates, times, small notes written with care. Helps me remember patterns," he said. Olivia stepped closer, her eyes scanning the page, her expression tightening slightly as she took in the level of detail. "This is more than what we require." Marcus closed the notepad and slid it back into place. "Requirements are a minimum," he said, "not a limit." Daniel let out a quiet breath, the words landing deeper than expected. He shifted his stance, glancing again at the panel, then at Marcus. "You ever report these patterns?" he asked. Marcus stood slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth before placing it back on the cart. Sometimes, he answered. If someone is listening. The answer was not bitter, just honest. Olivia looked down at the floor, then back up, something in her expression softening in a way that did not come easily. We should have been listening, she said quietly. Marcus met her gaze for a brief moment, then looked away, back toward the corridor ahead. You are now, he replied. That was all. He picked up the mop again and continued forward, the steady motion resuming as if the conversation had never interrupted his work. Daniel remained where he was for a second longer, watching the path Marcus left behind. Clean, ordered, quietly maintained. He realized then that none of it was accidental. Every detail, every check, every note, it had all been part of something larger, something no one had taken the time to see. He stepped forward again, falling into pace behind Marcus, not leading, not directing, just following the rhythm that had already been set. The hum of the building continued around them, softer now, steadier, like it had settled into alignment with the one person who had been paying attention all along. And in that quiet, Daniel understood that some people did not need recognition to do the right thing. They just needed the chance to keep doing it. The building settled into a quiet rhythm that almost felt deceptive, like everything had returned to normal, when in reality something fundamental had shifted beneath it. Marcus moved steadily into the next section of the floor, the wheels of his cart rolling over a faint seam in the tile with a soft click that echoed briefly before fading. He stopped near a row of closed office doors, their glass panels reflecting his silhouette in fragments as he passed. Without looking back, he dipped the mop again, wrung it out, and began another slow pass across the floor, each movement measured, consistent, like a metronome keeping time for a system no one else could hear. Daniel remained a few steps behind, his hands resting near his sides now, no longer tense, no longer ready to react, just present. His eyes followed Marcus's pattern, the way he paused near vents, the way his head tilted slightly when he passed certain sections of the wall, as if he was listening for something deeper than sound. It was not guesswork. It was awareness built over time. Olivia lingered closer than before, her pace matching theirs without realizing it, her heels no longer sharp against the tile, but softened by the quiet that had taken hold of the hallway. How long have you been doing this? She asked, her voice low enough that it did not break the rhythm of the space. Marcus did not stop. This building, he replied. Almost 6 years. He shifted the mop, guiding it along the edge of the wall where dust gathered in thin, unnoticed lines. Night shift the whole time. Olivia glanced around, as if seeing the hallway for the first time through a different lens. And no one, she began, then stopped, the question unfinished. Marcus finished the motion of the mop before answering. People notice what they are responsible for, he said. Nothing more. The words were not sharp, but they carried a quiet clarity that settled into the space between them. Daniel looked down the corridor again, imagining the daytime version of this place. Offices filled, phones ringing, conversations overlapping, people moving quickly past the same walls Marcus had just checked inch by inch. And this, Daniel said slowly, gesturing lightly toward the pipes hidden behind the structure. This is not assigned to you. Marcus gave a small shake of his head. No, then, after a brief pause, he added, but it is here. The simplicity of it lingered. Olivia drew a slow breath, her gaze lowering to the clean path forming behind Marcus's work. You have been doing more than your job, she said, the words careful now measured. Marcus stopped for a moment, resting both hands lightly on the handle of the mop. He looked at the floor, then at the reflection of the overhead light stretching across it. I have been doing what needs to be done, he replied. Daniel shifted slightly, something unresolved still moving in his chest. Even when no one sees it. Marcus's expression did not change. Especially then. The hallway felt quiet again, but not empty. There was weight in it now. Understanding, slow and steady, like something settling into place after being ignored for too long. A faint mechanical hum passed through the walls, subtle but even, no longer carrying that uneven edge from earlier. Daniel noticed it immediately. The system was stable again, because someone had been paying attention long before anyone else thought to look. Olivia looked at Marcus, really looked this time, her eyes tracing the lines of his face, the quiet composure, the absence of any need for recognition. We almost wrote you up tonight, she said softly. Marcus glanced at her briefly, then back to his work. You did not, he answered. There was no accusation in it. Just a statement. Olivia nodded once, though he was no longer looking at her. Daniel reached into his pocket again, his fingers brushing against the edge of the photograph, a reminder of what he had seen and what he had almost missed. He did not take it out this time. He just let it stay there, grounding the moment. Marcus resumed moving forward, the cart rolling with that same steady rhythm, the mop gliding across the tile like it always had. But now, every small detail carried meaning. Every pause, every glance, every quiet check behind a wall no one else thought about. And as the three of them moved down the corridor together, the building no longer felt like a place filled with unseen systems. It felt like something being quietly protected, one careful step at a time. The corridor ahead narrowed slightly where the ceiling dipped, pipes running closer together above the tiles, their faint outlines visible through thin seams in the panels. Marcus slowed without announcing it, his pace shifting just enough for someone paying attention to notice. Daniel noticed. Olivia did too, though she did not say anything. The cart rolled to a stop near a vent low on the wall, its metal cover slightly discolored compared to the others, just a shade darker, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Marcus set the mop aside and crouched down again, his movements controlled, deliberate, like he was following a routine written long before this night. He placed his palm lightly against the vent, not pressing, just feeling. Waiting. The silence stretched. No hiss this time. No irregular pulse. Just a steady, even flow that passed beneath his hand like a quiet confirmation. He nodded once to himself, then reached into the cart and pulled out a small handheld tool, no larger than a flashlight. Daniel leaned in slightly. What is that? Marcus held it near the vent, watching the small indicator on its surface. Basic detector, he said. Nothing official. The light flickered once, then settled into a steady green. Marcus lowered it and slipped it back into the cart. Clear, he added, almost to himself. Olivia exhaled a breath she did not realize she had been holding. You carry that with you? She asked. Marcus stood, picking up the mop again. I carry what I need, he replied. There was no pride in the statement. No attempt to impress. Just a quiet practicality that made the answer feel heavier than it sounded. Daniel glanced at the vent, then back at Marcus. That was not part of your job description either. Marcus resumed moving, the mop gliding across the floor in smooth arcs. Descriptions do not cover everything, he said. The words lingered as they continued down the hall. The building felt steadier now, but Daniel could not shake the awareness that it had almost not been. That everything around them, every wall, every light, every quiet system, had depended on someone who was never meant to be responsible for any of it. Olivia walked closer this time, her steps aligned with Marcus's pace instead of trailing behind. Why did you stay in this job? She asked after a moment, her voice careful, but genuine now. Marcus did not answer right away. He finished a pass with the mop, then paused near a window at the end of the corridor. Outside, the city was still, streetlights casting long reflections across empty pavement, the world holding its breath in the early hours before morning. He looked out for a second, then back at the floor. It is quiet, he said. You can hear things. Daniel followed his gaze to the window, then back to Marcus. You mean problems? Marcus shook his head slightly. Not just problems, he said. Patterns. The words settled into the space between them, deeper than the others had. Olivia folded her arms again, but this time it looked more like she was holding on to that idea, turning it over in her mind. Most people do not listen for patterns, she said softly. Marcus gave a faint nod. Most people are not here when they show up. The hallway fell silent again, but not empty. There was a presence in it now, a recognition that had not been there before. Daniel reached into his pocket once more, his fingers brushing the photograph again, grounding himself in the reality of what he had seen and what he was still learning. You could have done something else, he said quietly. With your experience. Marcus looked at him, not defensive, not dismissive, just steady. I am doing something, he replied. No explanation followed. None was needed. The answer stood on its own. Olivia lowered her gaze, the weight of that truth settling in fully now. Marcus turned back to his work, guiding the cart forward, the wheels rolling with that same quiet rhythm, the mop moving in clean, deliberate strokes. And as they followed him down the last stretch of the corridor, It became clear that what had almost been overlooked tonight was not just a problem in the walls, but the quiet presence of someone who had been holding everything together without ever asking to be seen. The last stretch of the corridor opened into a wider section near the main lobby, where the floors shifted from matte tile to polished stone that reflected the overhead lights like still water. Marcus slowed again, not because something was wrong, but because the space required a different kind of attention. The mop moved more carefully here, each pass deliberate, leaving behind a surface that caught every line of light without distortion. Daniel stepped onto the polished floor and paused for a second, watching the reflection of his own shoes settle into clarity as Marcus worked. It felt strange, seeing something so clean knowing how close everything had come to being disrupted. Olivia stopped near the edge of the lobby, her gaze drifting toward the glass entrance doors where the faint outline of early morning had begun to form. The sky outside was still dark, but it carried a hint of blue now, the kind that signaled the night was almost over. "Morning shift will be here in a couple of hours," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Marcus did not look up. "They will not notice anything," he replied. The statement was simple, but it carried a quiet finality. Daniel glanced at him. "They should," he said. Marcus shook his head slightly, guiding the mop along the edge of the reception desk. "If everything works, there is nothing to notice." The words settled into the open space, echoing softly against the glass and stone. Olivia took a slow breath, her arms folding loosely again as she watched him finish the section. "There will be a report," she said after a moment. "About what happened tonight." Marcus paused briefly, then continued the motion of the mop without looking up. "There should be," he answered. Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady, but carrying something more deliberate now. "And your name will be in it." Marcus stopped. Not fully, just enough for the movement to break for a second. He rested both hands on the handle of the mop, his gaze lowering to the reflection beneath him. The light above cast a faint outline of his figure across the polished surface, steady but quiet. "That is not necessary," he said. Olivia stepped forward, her tone firmer now, though still controlled. "It is." Marcus looked up at her, then at Daniel, his expression unchanged but his eyes sharper now, more present. "The system was corrected," he said. "That is what matters." Daniel shook his head slowly. "That is not all that matters." The silence that followed was different from the ones before. This one carried tension, not conflict. Something closer to a line being drawn, not against each other, but against something unspoken that had been there all along. Olivia glanced between them, then spoke carefully. If this had gone unnoticed, she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Marcus held her gaze for a moment, then looked away, back toward the floor, toward the reflection that showed only the result, not the effort behind it. "But it did not," he said. Daniel stepped forward again, closing the small distance between them. "Because you noticed." Marcus exhaled quietly, the sound almost lost in the open space. He adjusted his grip on the mop, then resumed moving, the rhythm returning, steady and controlled. "Someone would have," he replied. The answer was soft, but it did not carry doubt. It carried choice. Olivia watched him for a long moment, something unresolved still sitting just beneath her expression. "Not in time," she said finally. Marcus did not respond to that. He finished the last pass across the floor, then lifted the mop, setting it back into the bucket with a quiet, controlled motion. The water rippled once, then settled. Daniel looked at the reflection in the polished stone again, at the clean, uninterrupted surface that gave no sign of what had nearly happened beneath it. Then he looked at Marcus. "You keep saying it is just your shift," he said. "But it is more than that." Marcus rested his hands lightly on the cart, his posture relaxed but grounded. "It is enough," he replied. The words did not argue. They closed the space gently, like a door that did not need to be locked. Outside, the first faint line of daylight stretched across the horizon, touching the glass doors with a soft glow. Inside, the building stood quiet, stable, held together not just by its systems, but by the quiet presence of someone who had chosen, again and again, to do what needed to be done without asking to be seen. The first light of morning pressed gently against the glass doors, pale and quiet, stretching thin lines across the polished floor that Marcus had just finished cleaning. The building felt still, but no longer heavy. The systems hummed in balance, steady and invisible again, like nothing had ever been wrong. Marcus stood by his cart, adjusting the handle slightly, checking the latch on the bucket with the same quiet attention he gave everything else. Daniel watched him from a few feet away, his posture no longer rigid, but not fully at ease either. Something inside him had not settled yet. "Marcus," he said, his voice lower now, carrying something more deliberate than before. Marcus looked up, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "Yes." Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph, holding it between his fingers for a moment before extending it toward him. "This belongs in your locker," he said. Marcus looked at the image, his expression unchanged, but his eyes softened just slightly, like recognition passing through something deeper than memory. He took the photograph carefully, not rushing, not lingering, just steady. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Daniel hesitated for a second, then spoke again. "You never told anyone." It was not a question. Marcus glanced down at the photograph, then slid it into the front pocket of his uniform, smoothing the fabric over it like it was something that needed to stay close, but not seen. "It was a different job," he replied. Daniel shook his head slightly. "It was the same thing," he said. Marcus looked at him again, holding his gaze for a moment longer this time. There was no argument in his expression, no need to correct, just a quiet acknowledgement that did not fully agree, but did not reject either. Olivia stepped closer, her voice careful, measured in a way that showed she understood the weight of what she was about to say. "There will be an official report," she said, "and it will include everything that happened tonight." Marcus did not react immediately. He rested one hand on the cart, the other relaxed at his side. "That is your decision," he said. Olivia nodded once. "And your name will be part of it." Marcus exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting toward the glass doors where the light had grown stronger, the outline of the city beginning to take shape beyond them. "Names are not what keep buildings safe," he said quietly. Daniel stepped forward, his voice firmer now, but still controlled. "But they matter when people get overlooked." The words hung in the air, not confrontational, but honest. Marcus considered that for a moment, his eyes lowering slightly, as if weighing something internal. Then he nodded, once, small but clear. "Then write it," he said. Olivia watched him closely, something in her expression shifting again, this time not uncertainty, but respect settling into place where assumption had once been. "I will," she replied. Marcus did not respond further. He turned back to his cart, checking the contents one last time before beginning to move toward the service hallway that led back to the storage rooms. The wheels rolled softly across the polished floor, the sound steady, familiar, unchanged. Daniel stood where he was, watching him go, the distance between them growing slowly but meaningfully. "Marcus," he called again. Marcus paused, turning slightly, one hand still on the cart. Daniel held his gaze for a second, then spoke with a quiet certainty that had not been there at the start of the night. "I was wrong." The words landed clean, without defense, without hesitation. Marcus looked at him, really looked this time, as if measuring the truth behind them. Then he gave a small nod, not dismissing, not elevating, just accepting. "You are not the only one," he said. There was no edge in it, no judgment, just a simple recognition of something larger than either of them. He turned back and continued down the hallway, the cart moving with that same steady rhythm, disappearing gradually into the softer light beyond. Olivia stood beside Daniel now, both of them silent as they watched him go. The building remained quiet, stable, untouched by what had nearly happened, held together not by recognition, but by the quiet consistency of someone who had chosen to care when no one was watching. And as the morning light filled the space where the night had once held its breath, the difference between what was seen and what truly mattered no longer felt invisible. Morning arrived quietly, not with noise or urgency, but with light that slowly filled the building from the outside in. The glass doors at the lobby glowed pale gold now, the reflections on the polished floor stretching longer, softer, less clinical than the fluorescent lights that had owned the night. Marcus moved through the service hallway, the cart rolling beside him with the same steady rhythm. But the air felt different here too. Lighter. Finished. He reached the storage room and pushed the door open, stepping inside without hesitation. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with supplies that most people never thought about, each one placed with quiet order. He set the mop back into its slot, rinsed it once more, wrung it out with practiced ease, then hung it to dry. The water dripped slowly into the basin beneath, each drop measured, consistent. Outside, Daniel and Olivia remained in the lobby for a moment longer, neither of them speaking, both of them watching the space Marcus had just left. The building was beginning to wake up. A distant elevator chimed softly. Somewhere above, a door opened and closed. The first signs of the day's shift arriving. Olivia adjusted her posture, straightening slightly, but there was no return to the sharp authority she had carried before. "We need to make sure this does not happen again," she said, her voice steady but quieter now. Daniel nodded, his eyes still on the hallway. "It almost did," he replied. Olivia exhaled slowly, glancing down at the reflection of the entrance doors on the floor. "We rely on systems," she said. "We assume they will alert us." Daniel shifted his weight slightly. "Systems do not notice patterns," he said. "People do." The words hung there, simple but undeniable. Olivia looked at him, then back toward the hallway where Marcus had disappeared. "Then we change the way we listen," she said. It was not just a statement. It was a decision. Daniel nodded once, the agreement quiet but firm. A few minutes passed, and the sound of footsteps began to echo faintly through the building, different from the night before. Faster, less aware. The day's shift arriving, carrying coffee cups and conversations, stepping into a space that felt completely ordinary. The lobby doors opened, letting in a rush of cool morning air, and with it, voices that filled the silence without noticing what had once occupied it. Olivia turned toward the reception desk, already shifting into the rhythm of the day, but something in her movement had changed. Slower, more deliberate. She paused briefly, her hand resting lightly on the polished surface Marcus had cleaned, her fingers tracing the edge as if grounding herself in what had been done before she arrived. Daniel remained where he was, watching as people moved through the space, their reflections passing over the floor without a second glance. He reached into his pocket again, then stopped. The photograph was no longer there. It had been returned, where it belonged. He let his hand fall back to his side, a small motion, but one that carried a quiet sense of completion. In the service hallway, Marcus finished securing the last of the supplies, checking each item with the same care he had shown all night. He removed his gloves slowly, placing them side by side on the shelf, then wiped his hands with a clean cloth before folding it neatly. No rush, no need, just completion. He stepped back, looking over the room one last time, ensuring everything was in place. Outside, the building continued to fill with life, unaware, uninterrupted. Marcus reached for the light switch, his fingers pausing for just a fraction of a second before turning it off. The room dimmed, settling into shadow, quiet and still. He closed the door gently behind him, the soft click barely audible over the distant sound of the day beginning. And as he walked away from the space he had maintained through the night, there was no announcement, no recognition, no shift in the world outside. Just a building standing exactly as it should, held together by something most people would never see, but would always depend on. The building had fully awakened by the time Marcus stepped back into the main corridor, but nothing about him changed to match it. The noise had returned in layers now, conversations overlapping, shoes moving quickly across the floors he had already cleaned, phones ringing somewhere in the distance. It all passed around him, through him, without interruption. He moved the same way he always had, steady, unhurried, guiding the empty cart beside him as he made his way toward the exit reserved for staff. The polished floor no longer reflected only light. It reflected movement now, people crossing paths, shoes leaving faint marks that would be gone by the time the day ended. Daniel stood near the security desk, watching it all unfold with a stillness that did not belong to the morning rush. His uniform was the same. His posture was the same. But something in the way he observed had shifted. He was no longer scanning for problems. He was noticing what had already been there. Olivia stood a few feet away, speaking quietly with a member of the incoming team, her tone professional, controlled, but no longer distant. Every now and then, her gaze drifted toward the corridor Marcus had just walked through, as if recalibrating something internal each time she looked. Marcus passed them without drawing attention, just as he always had. No one stopped him. No one called his name. The movement of the day carried on around him, unaware. When he reached the staff exit, he paused just long enough to adjust his grip on the cart, then pushed the door open. The cool morning air met him immediately, softer than the artificial chill inside, carrying the quiet sounds of a city already in motion. He stepped outside, letting the door close behind him with a muted click that disappeared into the noise of the street. Inside, Daniel's eyes followed that door for a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned back to the lobby, his gaze dropping to the floor Marcus had cleaned hours before. It was already marked again. Footprints, faint streaks, signs of use. He watched a man walk across it without looking down, coffee in hand, mid-conversation, unaware of the reflection beneath his feet. Daniel inhaled slowly, then exhaled, something settling into place inside him with quiet certainty. Olivia finished her conversation and stepped back toward him, her voice low. "The report will go through today," she said. Daniel nodded. Good. There was no urgency in the exchange. No need to emphasize it further. The decision had already been made. Olivia glanced toward the door again, then back at the lobby. "He will not be here to see it," she said. Daniel shook his head slightly. "He does not need to be." The words were not dismissive. They were understanding. The building continued its rhythm around them, steady and unaware, held together by systems that worked quietly in the background. But now, at least for them, those systems had a different meaning. They were no longer just mechanisms. They were something someone had chosen to care for when no one else was watching. Outside, Marcus walked down the sidewalk, the early sunlight catching the edges of the city in soft gold. He moved without hurry, blending into the flow of people starting their day, just another figure among many. No uniform of recognition, no visible weight of what he had carried through the night, just quiet presence. He reached the corner, paused briefly as the traffic light shifted, then stepped forward with the rest of the crowd. Behind him, the building stood tall and unchanged, its glass reflecting the sky, its walls holding steady, its systems balanced. Inside, people would work, move, speak, and leave, never knowing how close the night had come to something else. And Marcus did not turn back to look. He did not need to, because what mattered had already been done, in silence, in patience, in the kind of care that does not ask to be seen. And as the light of the morning spread across the street, there was no announcement, no recognition,